Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Ari, and today we're going to have some more stories about our toxic life. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to my channel, like the video, if you enjoy it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now without further ado, let's go. Today's first story. In this story, a married couple's stability is shattered when the wife secretly sells her car to fund her luxury desires and becomes entangled with another man. The husband's discovery of incriminating chat messages leads to a confrontation. Fueled by anger and betrayal, he initiates divorce proceedings, retaining the car and seeking support from friends. The wife grapples with guilt and struggles to rebuild connections. The husband, on the path to healing, turns to counseling and fitness. This concise narrative encapsulates the emotional turmoil and subsequent journey of self-improvement arising from the devastating effects of infidelity. Now let's get into the story. My wife, 38, was trying to sell her car when she decided to betray me and destroy my hopes for the future. We were married for 4 years, and everything was good. I guess I can't say great, because we always struggled a little financially. I, 40, had a job I really enjoyed that paid a little less than a more unpleasant or more demanding job. My wife always told me she just wanted me to be happy, and I told her the same. So she worked at her favorite clothing store. Not too terrible. At least. We both had jobs and could pay the bills. But I think my wife wanted luxury. I think she dreamed of being spoiled like a movie star. That's part of the reason she decided to sell her car. We just paid it off after years of making huge payments, and I was pretty upset. She didn't want to savor the time we had with it. She said she wanted to upgrade by selling it for cash so she could put a huge down payment on the next vehicle. It made sense, but I didn't really like this idea. My wife wanted a nicer car, and her mind was set on it. So she invited a man over to our house to come see and test drive it. But she waited until I was at work and didn't tell me about it. It wasn't until 3 days after his test drive that my wife asked me to take better pictures of the car and interior. After I did, I plugged my phone into the computer we both used, and when the screen came on, there was a chat box opened. In the most recent messages, she thanked him for his generosity, said she really enjoyed being with him, and asked when he could come over again. In earlier messages, she talked about trying to sell her car for an upgrade and how her husband was at work so he could come drive it around a little. I couldn't believe how bad she was at covering her tracks. There was another window open that showed her bank accounts, recent transactions, and the most recent thing was a deposit from PayPal for $200. Not enough to buy a car, but perhaps enough to buy some time in bed with a pretty woman. I was fuming, but it was hard to really feel furious when I couldn't believe she would do this. I trusted her. We were married. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was right in front of me. I kept shaking my head, and my face was stuck in a scowl. I didn't know how to handle this. I kept telling myself my wife had to have a conscience, meaning I wouldn't have to wait long for her to come clean and break down in tears. I came home from work the next day, and she was still acting like everything was fine. While she was in the shower, I got on the computer. This time the chat box and windows were closed, but all I had to do was click login on Messenger and I found their conversation. According to this, he was in our house and with my wife earlier that same day. I was really starting to feel the fury now. Not only had she failed to come clean or show any signs of remorse, but she brought him over and did it again. I didn't know it was possible to feel the level of anger I felt at that moment. I printed screenshots of the chat, closed the chat box and put them in my nightstand just before my wife came out of the shower. I think she realized she hadn't had intimate with me in a week and I was probably expecting it, otherwise I might get suspicious. She was already naked, so she got into bed with me and started getting really close. I was stiff as a board, but not the important part. I couldn't lay with her and I couldn't keep pretending the way she was. I jumped out of bed, whipped open the drawer and slapped the papers down on the bed with her. I screamed at the top of my lungs to ask what this was. She jumped out of her skin and started breathing rapidly while trembling. She looked at the pages, then back to me. She said nothing. I yelled again, so she squeaked that she was sorry. She offered no defense. She was just terrified and wanted me to feel bad for scaring her. I said whatever happens from this point forward is what she brought on herself. So if she doesn't like it, she needs to rethink her actions. I gathered some essentials, the paper evidence and the keys to the car she was trying to sell, because I helped her pay it off. I went to my dad's house, who was 77 years old at this point, and he was just happy I was there to stay for a while. I didn't tell him what was going on as I filed for divorce. My supporters were my friends from work and the people who shared my passion with me. My wife wasn't able to sell or use the car since I took the keys, and when the divorce was final, it was awarded to me and she had to move out. Infidelity screws a lot of people over. But I'm glad she didn't get out of the consequences. There were several times when she called me, really and hating herself, because she had a moment of clarity and saw what a piece of crap she was for doing that to me. She's had trouble connecting with anyone, even as friends, because she told me she feels like they can tell. She doesn't know who she is anymore. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I never saw the chat. And that scared the. I've started going to counseling. At least I know that I'll know when I'm ready to start dating. I've started going to the gym to ease my stress. And before this, I was not a well-built person. That's another positive outcome. I'm in the best shape of my life. Today's second story. In this story, Opie plans a surprise birthday party for their wife but discovers her having an affair in her workplace's parking lot. They proceed with the party but expose her infidelity with a video projector and kick her out of their home. The wife and her lover lose their jobs, and he focuses on their child while moving forward with their life. Now let's get into the story. The very next day was my wife's surprise birthday party. I was excited because I actually succeeded at planning a surprise party for her. She said she never had one because she always accidentally discovered the plans for it. I guess the last time her parents tried to throw her one was when she was 16. She was turning 27 now, and I was 25. I stayed at home with our 4-year-old son while she went to work. I was out running errands for birthday party supplies when I drove through her work parking lot to find her car. My plan was to leave a rose and romantic note on it, giving her instructions to meet me at a specific address at a specific time tomorrow. Of course, she was going to come home to me after work and ask me about the note, but it was the spontaneous surprise I aimed for. I circled the parking lot quite a bit before I caught a glimpse of her car in the very corner of the parking lot on the backside of the building. I got close enough to it to see movement inside. That was very weird. So I parked my car as close as I could to hers and zoomed in on my phone's camera. I started recording the movement in the car and caught multiple glimpses of her topless with another man. I couldn't believe she was doing this. They were having intimate in the company parking lot. I looked around for any security cameras and noticed they were all just out of range from my wife's car. She parked there intentionally. How many times had she done this? I felt like I was going insane. But our son was with me in the back seat of my car. I had to play it cool, stay strong, and go home to come up with a plan. At home, I typed out a text to the surprise party guest list. This guest included all of our friends and family. Surprisingly, none of my wife's coworkers. She probably intended to keep family lives separate from work life for a reason. The text explained that I discovered only today, the day before the party, that my wife was having an affair. The party would go on, but instead of yelling, we would yell something else. Instead of the other activities I had planned, we would do something else. Everyone was very sympathetic to me and agreed to do as I said. Even my wife's mom called me to apologize on her daughter's behalf and say I didn't deserve this betrayal and pain. I broke down crying on the phone with her. When my wife arrived home, I pretended everything was fine. It was really hard to do, but I knew tomorrow was going to be everything I needed it to be. The next morning, I spoke to my lawyer and picked up divorce papers. Then I arranged with the venue to be able to use their video projector. I went back to my wife's work and put the note on her car without the rose. She didn't deserve a rose. Then I got back home and waited. As anxious and sad as I was, I knew the end of my marriage was not the end of the world, especially if she was the cheating whore she proved herself to be. My wife confirmed she got the note by texting me. I took our son to my mom's house and gave him a hug. The worst thing about divorce was the impact it would have on him. When I arrived at the venue, guests were arriving and apologizing to me. They'd assured me they would do anything to help support me through this heartbreak. We got everything set up so it would be one hell of a show. When my wife walked in, the lights went out and we held our breath. As soon as she walked in, the lights came on and everyone jumped out yelling, "Hey, cheater." I allowed a few moments of awkward silence while my wife's brain processed that everyone just called her a cheater. She looked offended, scared, and confused. Then I pushed play on the projector. It showed the video of her car rocking back and forth with glimpses of her topless self. Her jaw dropped and she covered her mouth with her hands. She looked around the room, noticing all her friends and family staring at her in disapproval. The guests decided to leave now, and I thought it was a good time too. I left my wife there. I got home 40 minutes before her. I stole her house key earlier that morning so she wouldn't be able to get in. All of her stuff was on the front porch. She arrived home only to be shocked all over again. She broke down crying again. I spoke to her from the second-story window, telling her she had to get her stuff and leave because she wasn't my wife anymore. She just flipped me off while she cried and called someone 10 minutes later. It looked like the man she cheated with was helping her take her stuff somewhere. To his house, maybe. I knew who my wife's boss was, so I emailed him the video I caught. The next morning, I got a reply. He was able to use security cameras to identify who walked to and from the car with my wife, and they would both be fired immediately. Of course, it didn't take long before my wife called me. She cussed me out and called me names, but that didn't bother me. I knew she was going to realize just how badly she messed up. All through the time of the divorce and afterward, she begged and pleaded with me to stop changing our lives. Eventually, I stopped responding to her because she knew she did this to us. I haven't heard from her in a while. My main focus will always be my son. I have hope that I'll find a good woman for me and a good mother figure for him. Today's third story. In this story, OP becomes wealthy due to his ownership in his father's company and buys a mansion for his wife. However, he notices odd occurrences between his wife and their butler, including them doing chores together, lounging by the pool, and even entering their bedroom. Eventually, he catches the butler smelling his wife's panties on a security camera and fires him. He hires a female maid instead. Later, he finds the fired butler back in his house, claiming his wife hired him for various tasks. It is revealed that the wife had an affair with the butler, leading to a divorce. Despite the betrayal, the man remains confident in his ability to recover, both emotionally and financially. Now let's get into the story. 10 years into our marriage, I became very wealthy thanks to the percentage of ownership I had in my father's company. So I bought my loyal and lovely wife a mansion for us to live in, which came with a butler who was prepared to take care of all the undesirable chores. My work schedule was pretty spontaneous because I could visit the office as I pleased or work from home. Our marriage and life together for the next 20 years after that were blissful other than some odd moments and occurrences. One day I arrived home from work to find the butler with my wife standing side by side doing dishes. She was drying the easier part, but I didn't understand why she was willingly doing any of the chores and standing so close to him. Their elbows touched a few times and I coughed to let them know I was there. My wife jumped, but he just moved away from her a little bit. She said she felt bad he was in here all by himself, so she wanted to keep him company and help a bit. She was so cheery and warm, I couldn't tell if she had any ill intentions. Another time I came home to find her lounging in the pool with the butler, gardening and staring at her. They laughed a few times before I came out to greet them. It was clear that they were at least friends, but I didn't like how friendly they were. I thought I was just being controlling and jealous. So I accepted that my wife was friends with and cared about the butler. What was the harm in that if I trusted my wife of 17-ish years? At this point we spent every moment I wasn't busy together. I loved her and I could tell she loved me. Yet another odd occurrence was when I walked upstairs to find the butler closing our bedroom door. It had been hours since I was upstairs because my wife was still sleeping. It was odd and I asked him if she called for him. He jumped when I spoke and turned around sheepishly, although I could tell he wanted to act normal. He stammered and said she called to ask him for some water. I accepted that for a moment, but reminded him that he was not to enter our bedroom or open the door. He didn't know what to say besides yes, sir. He walked away quickly and I opened the door to find my wife in her panties drinking water. I asked her if the butler saw her like that, and she said no. She just took off her robe. Again, I was skeptical. I was heavily considering hiring a new butler. It seemed like she was flirty with him at least, and I didn't like that he was most likely in our bedroom with my wife in her panties. Before I could terminate him, I saw him smelling my wife's panties. I know it's really bad. Really ballsy. I caught him on the security camera. I told him that was unacceptable and made my wife really uncomfortable. I didn't even tell her about it. But when I told him she was uncomfortable, he instantly looked like he didn't believe me. That ticked me off. I told him he was fired. I hired someone else, this time a female maid. Since I knew my wife was straight, I decided that even if I was jealous and protective, it was a smart decision. 1 week later, I arrived home to find the maid outside gardening. I went upstairs and found the butler I fired coming out of our bedroom once again. Except this time he was dressed in regular but still kind of formal clothes. He looked at me like he was amused but inconvenienced because I was there and saw him. I asked him what he was doing in my house again and he told me my wife hired him for something else. He said it with such nerve, all I wanted to do was punch his smug face. I told him to leave and not to come back no matter what my wife told him as he walked away. I went into the bedroom and found my wife wearing a skimpy little nightgown. I asked her what was happening and she looked nervous. She said I was home earlier today than the week before and I told her she always knew my schedule was spontaneous and not to change the subject. She turned red and told me I was freaking out over nothing. I asked her why she couldn't explain why she was here in her skimpy nightgown. After the butler I fired just came out of the room. She was pretty stunned and said she hired him back for things around the house the maid couldn't handle. I asked if one of those things was helping her with her personal plumbing and lubrication. Her jaw dropped and she couldn't look me in the eye. Her cheeks must have been burning, they were so red it looked like blood vessels in her face were showing up. It was crazy. Her face never turned that red in all the 30 years we were together. She finally said in a weak voice that if he did help her with that, it was nothing against me. I told her that it most definitely was against me because she belonged to me. We were life partners and only I was permitted to help her with her plumbing and lubrication. She said she wouldn't ask him to help her again and asked me not to worry about it anymore. I asked if that meant she was admitting to sleeping with him, and she was silent. She nodded yes, very minimally, with her eyes watering. Then she started speaking really fast about how it didn't matter. She just considered it a job, nothing meaningful that would take away from our marriage, and she needed me to forget about it so that nothing changed between us. I told her this was most certainly going to change things between us and it already took everything away from our marriage. I told her we were over, called her a name and told her to get out of my home. I was extremely careful to get a postnup signed after I came into more money. It's not that I didn't trust my wife at the time. It was because my father and I were lawyers, which means I couldn't ever be made the fool. So my wife sorrowfully packed her bags. She had too many bags for someone with nowhere to go. The butler came up in the car he afforded with the paychecks I gave him. They stayed in a motel where the butler had been staying after I fired him. My wife had so many belongings, clothes that she had to leave some of it behind, which I immediately told the maid to sell on eBay or keep for herself. They stayed in that motel as long. But their money ran out without me signing the checks. They tried to contact me individually, blaming each other for what occurred, and asking me to take them back into the mansion. It was gratifying that they were turning on each other and failing to survive or do anything with their lives. Even to this day, my ex still tries to ask me for help and gives me some updated sob stories about where she is in life. It is not glamorous. It's far from what she was accustomed to. With me, I've become something like Bruce Wayne in town, and I have no complaints. Even though her betrayal hurt, I knew from the moment I found out that I could recover from it, not because of my money, but because I know what love is. And it wasn't that.